Hello, my name is Rowan. I work with Nomad IT, and the purpose of this video is to give you an overview of the admin side of the Shindig platform that we're using to virtualize academic conferences this year. So each administrator, each panel convener or conference volunteer that has stood to be an admin in a session will be sent a specific URL to log into the session. This will be different from the login for the normal participants and attendees, so we will send this to you separately, and it is tied to your email address, so you will need to use, when logging in, the right email address, the email address that's in our system and with which we communicate with you. So you will enter your name, your email address and your institution, and then click to enter the event as an admin. And here we are in the admin interface of Shindig. As I've stated elsewhere, we advise the best software to possibly use is Chrome. However, this does work in Firefox and in Safari, but our best user experiences so far have been in using Chrome. So when you first enter the room, you will find yourself in this default view. In the default view, you have a couple of podiums at the top of the screen, and you have your toolbar taking up about 40% of your screen depth. The administrators in the session are over on the right hand side, so there's myself and my colleague James from Nomad IT, and the participants you'll be able to see in your toolbar. There are thumbnails of the three participants there. We have Ellie and Angela and Trinu, who've all volunteered to help in this session today. So they're there as participants. The number 3 on the toolbar gives you the total number of participants in the room. So
I can hear. Is that okay?
So in this default view, we have this backdrop, which is an image that we can choose to preload into the session. And there will be, for the attendees on the left side, there's also some links which we can pre-program, which might take you to the timetable or to the coffee break or to the exhibitors. Okay. If you put your mouse over things when you're in Shindig, it normally helps you to identify the possible functionality. So for example, if I put my mouse over Trinu, it shows me who she is. If I put my mouse over James on the right, not only shows me who he is, but it also indicates that I can carry out various functions with him. I can spotlight him, which means to bring him onto stage. I can IM, which means to text chat with him, or I can sidebar, which means I have a conversation with him off to the side of the screen, which is a bit like a green room backstage. So I can chat to James if I need to without people in the room seeing me. As you can see in the top right of your toolbar, you can minimize your toolbar or you can maximize your toolbar. We find that the optimal view is the middle one, the default one. This is because when it's minimized, you cannot see very much of what's going on. And when it's maximized, you can't see very much of what's going on stage. So usually this is the best view to use for the time being. Okay. I'll now show you, as you first enter the room, you're going to want to get it set up ready for your panel. So I suggest we'll ask the conference volunteer in each panel to load up some slides. So you move your mouse over the first podium, you click select file, and I'm going to select first of all the automated welcome slide. So this puts a slide up onto the stage for the participants. I'm also going to select a basic instructions file so that they've got some information about how to sort out their technical difficulties. So this is a slide which we can provide in every panel, and we would suggest showing at the beginning of the panel. And in this case, to help you a little bit, you can see now there's a third podium. We can have a maximum of 4 podiums on stage. So on the third podium, I'm going to load up a content slide so I can just show you what we're going to go through in this demonstration. And then lastly, I can create there's a 4th podium here, and when I want to go on stage and start saying hello, I will click broadcast here to do that. So just to show you that you can load up slides. If you put your mouse over the slide, you can see I can stop the welcome slide, I could stop my instruction slide, or if it was multiples, I could move forward and back. So there are instructions for the slides that have been preloaded. Okay, I'm now going to broadcast. So I click broadcast, Hello there, thank you for joining us in this session and for your patience as we're a little late in starting. As you can see, I'm administering this panel. Let's pretend I'm the panel convener and I will be hosting and leading my way through this session, inviting people onto stage and leading the questions and answers. So you can see I've displayed a couple of slides to help you. First of all, our welcome slide is just to verify you're in the right room. I think we now are confident that we are, so I'm going to take that down and move my mouse here. Click stop, welcome slide. Secondarily, the slide on the left hand side now shows you how you can access, using the cog feature, your camera and microphone settings if you're having any problems. The other key information to give you is that if you're having any glitches, hitting refresh in your browser is a usual way of resolving those problems. This also goes for administrators, so I'm going to demonstrate that as an administrator what happens. If I hit refresh now, my screen will have redrawn and the participants will have momentarily lost me, maybe for a minute, but I should now be, well, a couple of seconds, sorry, not a minute, a few seconds, and I'm back and any problems have been resolved. I'm going to get rid of that camera slide there. If you're an administrator, you don't have that cog in the top right corner as the attendees. Instead, you have to move your mouse over your thumbnail on the right hand side, and one of the buttons that comes up is settings. If I click on settings, then you can see I have the three boxes, one of which controls my camera. For example, I can set that to off. There you can see my camera is now off. And I can set it back to my camera again. If need be, one can also change one's microphone settings or sound settings. Just a little X to close your settings. Okay. As you can see, you can put slides up, you can also remove them. This last slide that I've left up is to take us through what we're going to go through today. So we're going to talk about, we've talked a little bit about the entry screen as we come in and how you might set up your panel. I will now take us over the toolbar that we can see as administrators and the views, and then we'll move on to how you load up files and get presenters up on screen onto the stage, how you'll handle the Q&A, how we can move and manipulate the various podiums, and then a few extra points before we talk about how you exit the session. So I'll leave that slide up for now just so I can help you through this content. Right, I'd like to cover the toolbar. As an administrator, it looks slightly different than as an attendee. We've talked about the different sizing already. So in this optimal view, on the left-hand side, it tells me there are 4 people in the room. And if I want to look at those participants, I can mouse over or I can search. So for example, if I put my mouse in the search box and I key in Trinu, you see the thumbnails are filtered down to show me just someone with the name Trinu. If I put Angela, I can then see thumbnails are filtered down to just Angela. Okay. This is how I can also, if I click on them, I get a little card appear which tells me how good their connection is, which is quite important when considering bringing them onto stage. I can also send them a text message if need be through a textual message through the IM. Spotlight is what brings them onto stage. Okay. We'll also show if their image is frosted. If any of the participants, for example, don't have a good image, so this one I'm seeing here, Ellie Audience, for example, let me click on that, and you can see her connection is excellent, but she's got only the audio function enabled. So this is possibly that she's decided to disable her camera for privacy reasons, which is absolutely fine. These thumbnails are only taken periodically anyway, they're not a live feed. Okay. The second button in our toolbar is raise hands. If I click on that, I can see the cards for anybody who may have raised their hand, and we'll look at that in depth later. The third tab allows me to see anyone who's raised a question and what those questions might be. From there I can either discard them or address them or publish them on stage. If I click on our fourth tab, it shows me the chat. And as an administrator, you'll be able to see all the chats going on in the group chat boxes. You won't be able to see anyone's private chat. People privately chatting is their business. But as I can see, there's been a little bit of discussion here already by our team, who are attendees. And so as an administrator, you can see that. As the lead administrator running the conference panel, you may not want to be focused too much on the chat. You may have enough to do, and you may decide to leave the monitoring of the chat to either your co-convener or possibly the conference volunteer. Okay. The fifth button addresses whether or not you leave the recording on, so that we will set, I think it's set automatically to record, and then we will be instructing the conference volunteers to turn off recording for all those panels which are not recording. So I can do that here. I just press stop, and now Shindig is no longer recording this session. And finally, the advanced tab is how one alters the house lights. As the administrator, you can turn down the lights in the room, and what you can see in that little sample at the bottom is how that will affect the attendees. They'll see that the background will get darker. As an administrator, you can't really see any difference. If you take it down to the bottom, you can temporarily disable participants' ability to have video chats with each other, or to strike up new video chats with each other. Given that we've picked this platform as a way of facilitating networking, I would not advise doing that. I would suggest you leave the lights up. Allow people to have the conversations they wish to have, as they do not disturb the presentations taking place or the rest of the panel. Okay, so that's the toolbar in brief. Okay, I'd now like to just load up a slide that helps us think about the views, the different ways in which the screen can be arranged. So as you can see, I've gone to a third podium. I've clicked on Select File, and that shows me a tab full of PDFs. I'm going to pick the views and broadcast that. So now we have 3 podiums up on the stage. And this is called the default view that we're in at the moment, where as in this slide, you can see some people floating around in thumbnails at the bottom, and then you have whatever's on the stage in the top. You can change from this view and so that the slides maybe can become larger. So we can use a full screen view, so that the floating icons will disappear for everybody and they'll be able to focus more on what's on stage. So I move my mouse over a podium, and in the bottom right of that podium I'm now seeing a toolbar with 3 icons. I can pick default display, full screen and equal, or full screen and emphasis. So I'm going to pick full screen and equal. This then redraws the screen. What we can see is that the 3 podiums now take up the full screen. And how will that look for our attendees? Well, they will look like this, I think. That one is not correct. This one, no. Sorry, this one. This slide shows full screen view for attendees. So the background has faded away, and they're left with, in this case, in the slide, 2 podiums up on the stage in equal view. And they have these little buttons in the bottom right of there, which we've ringed in blue there, which allow them to move between those 2, full screen equal and full screen emphasis. The emphasis view is in this slide. It shows one of the people on stage, or one of the windows on the stage, podiums, is larger. So for us to enable that, as an administrator, we move our mouse over a podium. So in this case, I'm going to put it over my podium, and I click full screen emphasis display. This then changes the view so that I am now emphasized largest and my slides are off to the left. This might be a suitable view when a presenter is first called up onto stage and is about to begin their talk. However, once they start talking, the administrator might wish to put the slides up as the emphasis view. To do that, the administrator moves their mouse over the slide and clicks emphasize this podium. And this will now bring my slide into the larger window. You can also do that through dragging and dropping. So I'm just going to drag this slide and drag it across. So now this one is emphasized. And now I'll put my slides back again, like that, by drag and drop. So you can either use the little toolbar over the podium you want to emphasize, or you can drag and drop into the emphasized position. When one alters the view as an administrator, it will alter the view for everybody. So everybody's screen will suddenly redraw into the format you choose. So if I now, for example, go back to default display by clicking here, after a second or so, everybody's view will then go to default display. But each participant also can control their own view. So having done that, the participants themselves are able to then use their own toolbars and icons to influence which view they want to look at. So they can take themselves back to full stage if need be, to default view, or to full screen, whichever they prefer. So there are some advantages. Maybe between presentations you might want to go back to the default view, or if you're in just having a discussion you might want to go to the default view, as it will remind participants that there is a room full of participants. They'll be able to see those thumbnails floating around. However, when you get into the presentations, I suspect the full screen view will be better, as it not only emphasizes the stage, but it also will help those who perhaps are unable to see small fonts and would prefer to see things that are larger on their screen. So those are the views. Okay, to get rid of my slides, I move my mouse over the podium with the slides and I press stop. Okay, I'd now like to move to the third item in the contents there, which is to talk about the kind of files that we can load up into Shindig, which you can provide in advance for us, and then how we get our presenters up onto stage to give their presentations. So as an admin, I can move my mouse over this third podium that's not yet on stage, and I can choose select file. When I click that, this pop-up appears with 3 different tabs. The first tab is for PDFs. So slides, PowerPoint slides and so on must be saved as PDFs, and then we can load those slides from this tab. You've already seen me do that earlier in the presentation. The second tab is music, and as you can see I have my MP3 files loaded there, and I can call up a music file and play it. The third tab is the video tab, and you can see I have 2 videos loaded already into the session, which I could then bring up by clicking and then clicking broadcast here. And I'll demonstrate that again in a moment. Okay, I'm now going to take down our table of contents, if you like, our content slide there. We don't need that for this presentation. And I'm going to ask my colleague Trinu, who is going to give a small presentation and demonstrate how it works when we bring a presenter onto stage. So first of all, I need to find my presenter. So I go down to my toolbar, I click on the overview, and then I have my thumbnails. If there are very few thumbnails, few people in the room, I can move my mouse over them to search, or I can use the search bar and key in her name. So there she is. I move my mouse over her thumbnail and I click on that. And first of all, I can see that her connection is excellent, so that means we have no problems. I can see her video thumbnail, which suggests that her camera is enabled and ready to go. As it's not too formal a context, running a panel, we're not making a professional video, we don't need to test that out. I can just click Spotlight. If I click Spotlight, it will bring her onto a podium. So let me do that now. It offers me to swap with myself. I'd like it to say a few words with her first, so I'm going to click New Podium. Hello, Trinu.
Hello, everyone. Hi.
Thanks for joining us. So, are you ready to give your presentation?
Yes.
Okay, and if you could just remind me, I'm going to load up the files for you, but can you remind me what the presentation is on?
So the presentation is about the 6 wives of Henry VIII.
Okay, so I'm going to take myself off. I'm going to load up your slides and emphasize those, and off you go. Just a second. So here I've taken myself off stage. I'm still able to control. So the second podium, I'm going to select the file. It's a PDF, and it's the 6 wives of Henry VIII. Broadcast here. Once it's loaded, I'm going to emphasize it on full screen view. And Trinu can commence.
Now, today we're going to talk about the 6 wives of Henry VIII. And you see fairly bad images of all 6 of them here in the beginning, but there will be some better pictures to come in the next slides. And Ro, can you put the next slide, please?
So I move my mouse over the slide. I choose the next slide button, and that moves to the next slide.
So the first wife of Henry VIII was famously Catherine of Aragon. She was Spanish, and she was the queen consort for actually quite a long time. She had been married to Henry's brother first, but as she failed to produce a male heir, Henry's interests in her finally faded, and he decided to find himself another wife. However, the marriage in the beginning was fairly happy. And next slide, please, now.
So I move my mouse over the slide box and I choose the next slide.
And Henry is quite famous as a Renaissance time king to have written music. And there's a piece of music that is called Pastime with a Good Company, also known as the King's Ballad, that Henry is believed to have actually written for or about Catherine of Aragon. And can we now play the audio, please, to hear the music? So I go to
select file, I find the music file, it's called Pastime, and I go broadcast here, and I can choose a podium. I'm going to put it on a small podium.
And now pause for a second.
So I move my mouse over the music and I click on the pause icon.
So the lyrics for Pastime with Good Company start with Pastime with good company, I love and shall until I die, something he obviously did not do. But it is all about how one enjoys the company of another person, and also there are lots of references to God, which was fairly typical of Henry's mindset. Can we hear a little bit more of the music?
So I move my mouse over the podium with the music and I click on the pause icon to continue. And so we can hear the music continue. What I can't do is skip through the file. I can either press play or pause.
Thank you. Now you can stop the file.
So I move my mouse over the stop sign and that will remove the podium.
And let's have next slide, please.
And so I move through the next slide.
Perhaps the most famous of Henry's wives was Anne Boleyn, who managed to be the Queen Consort only for 3 years, really, but who was involved with Henry for a long time before that, still during the reign of the previous Queen, Catherine of Aragon. And can we have the next slide, please?
So I click on next slide.
There is a theory that Henry was of sound body and mind until he had a horrible jousting accident. It happened when Henry was 44 years of age. It was just 4 months before Anne Boleyn lost her head, so to say. And I would like to show you now a video of Tudor time jousting to give you an idea what a jousting tournament could have been like.
And because it's a video, I want to emphasize it.
Can you please load the video?
So I'm going to click the main, there we go, and the video starts playing.
And pause, please.
Move my mouse over the video and click on the play icon to pause.
And the specificity of Tudor time tournaments was, of course, the force and the speed at which the jousting was done. And if things went wrong, which they often did in a sports like that, then of course the results could be quite horrible. And Henry indeed was badly injured. He lost consciousness for 2 hours, and as his horse had fallen on him, he injured his leg so badly that his leg actually was never normally healed. And it is believed that because of the concussion and because of the health issues that came later with this never healing wound, Henry became the man he was for the rest of his life, a horrible tyrant, if not to say psychopath. Can you play a little bit more of the video file, please?
So I move my mouse over the pause button to continue the video. Beg your pardon. Wow. Oh dear.
Thank you. You can stop the video.
Oh dear. Right. Press stop and that removes the video.
And we can go on to the next slide. After Anne Boleyn had been beheaded, the next wife was Jane Seymour, the one Henry claimed to be the love of his life, but actually the marriage was very short, only lasted a year. Jane died in childbirth, or actually just after childbirth, but she was the one who produced his male heir and was therefore the most beloved of his queens. Next slide, please. After Jane had died, it was deemed politically advisable to marry, to find someone from Protestant German kingdoms for Henry to marry, and the person who was picked was Anne of Cleves, who had a very short time as a queen, half a year, but actually the real time together lasted even less, because Henry decided from the very first moment that Anne of Cleves was extremely ugly. If you can go back one slide, please.
So this demonstrates the back functionality. You can also go back a slide.
If you compare Jane Seymour, and now going forward again to Anne's slide, one wouldn't be able to say that one of these ladies would have been more or less ugly, but this is sadly how history remembers, when in reality it was just Henry's odd tastes in women that have been put down into historical records. And we can now quickly go through the two remaining wives. Anne of Cleves obviously was divorced. The next one, Catherine Howard, again reigned for a very short time, just a year, and was beheaded for having been unfaithful to Henry VIII. And then the final wife, let's go to the next slide, please.
You see, she has to say next slide, please. If I was dozing off, of course,
Catherine
then
Parr,
I might have missed that.
Who was
prompt.
the lucky one, the one who got away, because Henry died before he could do anything really bad to her. Thank you. This concludes today's presentation. What I would like to point out to anyone presenting is that, as you could see, we could move backwards and forwards through the files, through the slides. So you can ask the panel convener to go forwards or go backwards. You cannot pick a random slide to go into, but normally also in any other PowerPoint presentation, this is not something you would do. And you do need to ask the convener to start the audio file and it's or the video file, and it can be paused and then it can be stopped, but you can't jump into random sequences inside of the files. So these are important aspects to remember. But thank you for your attention. If there are any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Thank you very much, Trinu. Thank you for your presentation and demonstration of the presenting functionality. Okay, what I will turn our attention to now is the functionality in the toolbar that we can use for interacting with our attendees. And these come really under the first tab, the second tab, which is called Raised Hands, and the third tab, which are the questions. So how we would use the raised hands, one might use it if one wants a generalized response to something. So one of the challenges of a virtual panel is one spends most of the time talking at one screen without any real understanding of whether anyone's listening, unless you're monitoring chats and so on. So it might be that I want to check, for example, could you just give me a quick show of hands that you could actually hear the audio and video files that we played there? Because sometimes there are glitches with those. And if people could just raise their hands just to let me know, that's great. And as an admin, I can see in my raised hands tab, I see 3 raised hands. It's gone down to, there we are, 3 raised hands. And I can see the cards of those people who raised their hands. They have their button, it's a toggle button, so they can raise a hand and then remove it. And you can see Ellie and Ralph taking their hands in and out there. So 3 of my audience, my colleagues there, have obviously signaled that they can hear it. And I can use this button here to clear the raised hands. It asks for confirmation, which I say yes, and it clears away the hands. The second way we might use the hands is when you might ask your attendees whether anybody would like to raise their hand if they would like to come up on stage and ask a question of the presenter. So do any of you have questions that you would like to come up and ask Trinu? If you do, please raise your hand. I see a raised hand from Ralph. So what I can do is I look over his card. I see it's got a video working. He's been waiting just a minute. And I see the spotlight button. So with that, I can bring Ralph onto stage, onto a new podium. Hello, Ralph. Thanks for joining us. I believe you have a question for Trinu.
Thank you, Owen. And thank you for your presentation, Trinu. I just wondered, Trinu, which of the 6 wives of Henry VIII is your favourite?
That is a very difficult question, honestly, because I'm fascinated by all of those. But I think probably the last one, Catherine Parr, she was a very smart, well-educated woman. She actually wrote a book in her time, and she did even try to argue with Henry VIII about religious matters, which, considering the fate of several of her predecessors, was a very, very brave thing to do.
Thank you, Trinu.
So having asked this question, because I dragged him up onto the podium, I now need to take Ralph down. So thank you for your question, Ralph. I move my mouse over his podium and I click stop broadcast, and that puts him back down in the audience. I can also go along here and click the little cross to clear his raised hand. So that's one way of using the raised hand functionality to take questions. The downside, of course, is that you're just like in a face-to-face conference. It's very difficult for you to judge how good the quality of the questions is coming at you. So the third tab, the questions functionality for the admins, you can instruct your participants if they have any questions to please use the ask button on their own toolbar, which is a little question mark, and they can use that to key in questions, type in questions that you'll then be able to see. Now, guys in the audience, please, if you could take a moment just to type in a question or two for our presenter. The great advantage of this in many ways is that you can screen the questions. So if I hadn't really liked that last question, I could have simply avoided that situation where Ralph got up on stage. It also makes sure that you can see a question mark in the question, which is so often a problem in panels, that there often is no real question after the first person stands up and talks for 5 minutes. Here, however, I can see a number here that tells me there's 1 question so far, and I look down and I can see it's Elaine. In this optimal view of my toolbar, I can't quite see the whole of her card, so I just need to scroll to see a little bit more. And you can see the options. I can, for example, if I felt that this question was not something I was going to address here and now, I could IM her to open a chat window and send her a message, maybe answering her question out of the view of everybody. Equally well, however, if I have answered it, I could click on this where it says answered, and that would mark it as having been answered. And if you're working with your co-convener on a full set of questions, this can be quite a useful function, as your co-convener may choose to pick off some of the questions to answer directly through the IM, and then your co-convener can mark the question as answered, so you don't then need to worry about bringing it onto the podium. You can, if you don't like the question, simply click the little X to get rid of it. Or if you find it a good question and you would like it to come up on stage, what you can do is you can publish the question by clicking publish. And this will go up for this number of seconds. Now this default is 10. We would advise changing that to 15. Gives people a little bit more time. And I'm going to press publish. And having, sorry. For some reason that doesn't seem to be working. I'm sorry, Elaine. Instead I will try with Ralph's question. Oh dear. It doesn't seem to be working either.
Both are working for me, actually.
Oh, are they? Right, okay.
Yeah.
So,
Yes. So Elaine asked.
Just a second, Trini, because of course they're not going to see that in this video.
Sorry.
What I'm going to do, because it's a slight glitch, it should come up on my screen. I'm going to hit refresh. And I'm now back. Okay. So what that demonstrates is if the platform doesn't behave quite as you're expecting, you as a convener can also hit refresh. What will happen is they'll lose your video feed for a couple of seconds while your browser redraws the screen. Now I'm going to move on to the questions again. I'm going to click on questions. I'm going to try by putting Elaine's question up first by clicking publish. There we go. This time it worked for me as well as everyone else. It says, was Catherine Henry's favourite name? We would advise the presenter or the convener to read out the question as well, not just rely on people's vision if they're not focused on the screen or they can't read that. So, Trinu, what was Catherine Henry's favourite name?
Yeah, I really like the question because all 6 wives, there are only 3 names. There are 3 Catherines, there are 2 Annes, and there is 1 Jane. So yes, he must have been partial. But the truth is that there was a very short list of popular female names that were used in the time, and they were constantly recycled. So Catherine, because the Saint Catherine was a very popular saint, was an extremely popular name all over Europe. So it was likely that a woman would be called Catherine.
Okay, and as she's answered that question, I will now clear that from my deck of cards. And I can see I have another question here, which is marked answered because I did publish it. So that automatically gives it the answered status. But I will publish it again just to show the functionality once more working on my screen. This is a question from Ralph, who asks, Trinu, who was Henry VIII's heir?
Again, a very good question. And in fact, there are 3 heirs, because to begin with, there was Edward, his son, who sadly died very, very young. And then after that, there was Mary, the daughter of Catherine of Aragon, who sadly to history is known as Bloody Mary. And then after that, there is Queen Elizabeth, the daughter of Anne Boleyn, Queen Elizabeth I, the probably most prominent royal of Renaissance times.
Thank you very much. Now, what you can also see on this question card is I also have the spotlight option. So if somebody had asked a question that you thought, okay, that looks like an interesting question, but I'd much prefer it to be given verbally, orally, then I could also have clicked spotlight to bring Ralph up onto stage, perhaps to give a little bit more background to his question if it was unclear, and then to ask that question. As we're a little short of time, I'm going to not do that. He's had his question answered. I'm going to clear that question. Okay, the third way you could perhaps take questions and interact is using the chat functionality. We would advise trying to minimize that for questions on the content of presentations. So we would suggest using the chat primarily for technical issues where people can write in they're having problems with their mic or their camera, and where the conference volunteer who's in the room is an admin would be able to hopefully pick those people out, have individual IM chats with them, and sort out their technical difficulties. But if you click on chat as an admin, you can see then you get the waterfall chat. This means that you can see all the chats across all the groups within the room. If there's more than 30, then they will be divided up into groups of 30. So as an admin, you get to see all of the conversation across all those sets of 30. If you're answering in there as an admin, you need to bear in mind that if there's more than one group of 30, that your answer may not make sense to people unless you kind of write in the question at the same time, because they may not have seen the original question in their own group of 30. But as we say, I think for taking questions, being able to screen them, decide what to do with them, bring people on stage, it's the question, the ask functionality, which is preferable to the chat functionality. Okay, the other way that you can engage in discussion and conversation in the panel is to open up podiums. So currently what we showed was that as an admin, I can drag someone up onto stage and then push them off again. We like to be a little bit more elegant, so what I can do over here, I move my mouse to the third podium, and I can click on this button that says Enable Open Podium. I'm going to make it up alongside us. As we don't need to be particularly focused, I can make us back to the default display. So the participants will now be moving around at the bottom of their screen, and in the top of the screen they can see 2 open podiums alongside the presenter and the convener. So just to demonstrate how this works, once the open podiums are there, anyone who's an attendee in the room can move their mouse over an open podium and click on the button to join the podium. So I would invite my colleagues down in the attendance list there to perhaps come up on stage and say hello. Thank you very much, Elaine. Welcome to the podium.
Hello.
Thank you, Ellie, for joining us. So they demonstrate very nicely that they are able themselves to bring themselves up on stage, whereupon they could ask a question. I don't know if do either of you have questions, or can we move on?
No, I have no questions, I'm afraid.
Okay, so let's pretend that Elaine has asked her question, she's received her answer, and she now decides she wants to climb off the podium without being shoved. Then Elaine moves her mouse over her podium. She will see a leave button, and she can click on the leave button to elegantly step down off the stage. Thank you very much. Now, of course, it doesn't mean that you don't have the power to push someone off the stage, so I can move my mouse over Ellie's podium there, and I can simply go remove user, pushing Ellie back down into the audience. So there are 2 ways to use those open podiums, but thank you both for joining us. Once you've had enough of the podiums, you move your mouse over the open podium and you can click disable podium. So you can have multiple people up on stage stepping on and off as they wish to ask questions, if you would like to do it that way. And that may work well at the end of a session. It's also possible for my co-convener to come on stage. I'm just going to disable that podium. And once I've finished fiddling, it will allow James to bring himself onto the stage, I think. Let's see. James, do you want to come up and join us? Here he is. So what James did there was he put his mouse over the spare podiums on his view, where he would have seen a button saying broadcast here. He clicked that and he joined us up on stage. Hi, James. Good to see you.
Hiya.
Hey.
So, of course, as conveners, neither of us need to be up here. We can take ourselves off to the side. What you can do when you're an administrator and you're on the side is you can have a sidebar conversation with somebody. And this facility allows you to first bring someone backstage, if you like, off stage in a green room, where you can check that their camera and their microphone are working and that they did actually want to come on stage in the first place. They may have accidentally raised their hand. And you can't do that when you're on stage broadcasting like James and I are now, but maybe at the end of this demonstration I will just illustrate that for you. But if you can see that people's images seem reasonably clear and their connection is fast enough, you possibly don't really need to complicate matters by sidebarring. You just bring them onto stage, and if it doesn't work for whatever reason, you can either try and help them out or remove them, push them back down into the audience. So that's the sidebarring functionality that admins have, which I'll demonstrate at the end. Okay, just a quick recap. We've covered the views, these default view that we're in now, an equal full screen view that I'm moving us to. And then if I want to emphasize myself, I move my mouse over my podium and click full screen emphasis so that I come slightly larger. We've talked about the toolbar, where we can see an overview of the participants. We can deal with raised hands, you can deal with questions and chat. You can turn off the video recording and you can take down the house lights. And that more or less covers everything you need to know as an admin. However, there are a couple of extra things I want to show you, so you may not need them every time, but it's worth demonstrating. So the first of these is what you do if the file you want to display hasn't been preloaded. And we can certainly imagine that some colleagues may provide their presentations rather late in the day, or they may provide an updated and revised set of slides for their presentation after some last-minute panic on the eve of the conference. So let's assume you want to show a slide that you haven't preloaded. So I go to the second button here, which is load file. It will then show me either a Finder window on a Mac or an Explorer window on a PC. And this allows me to find a resource. I'm going to pick up this slide here called panel formats. Now, I leave it just a second or two because it might take a little while for the file to upload onto Shindig's server. And then I can go to select file and I look for, there it is, number panel formats, and I can choose to broadcast that slide. Let's put it up on the large podium here. So you can, in fact, although we're asking delegates to provide their presentations a couple of weeks in advance so we can preload them, this is so we can minimize the potential for technical catastrophe, which is otherwise going to stalk us over the 4 days of the conference. It is possible, nevertheless, to load files if they are supplied late. The advantage of doing it in advance is that we know it's there and you can test it just before the beginning of the panel. Okay, I'm going to take that down. The other function that you may wish to use, although we wouldn't advise it for either audio or video files, is a screen share. And this works similarly for both an admin or a presenter. The icon is slightly different, but you move your mouse over the podium. And as an admin, you see a large button that says Share My Screen. As a presenter, it's a slightly smaller button, which when you put your mouse over it says Share My Screen. So when you click on Share My Screen, what happens is you get a window, a dialog box, allowing you to choose whether you share the entire screen or an application. We would advise most times choosing an application window and searching then for a particular application window. So I'm just going to look for, here's an application window. It's another instance of a browser. When I select that and click share, the audience will lose my audio feed for a couple of seconds. So once the share screen has loaded, what you see are my audio returns and people can hear me again. So you just need to know to have a slight pause. The other thing is you lose the video feed. So the audience can now see what I want to demonstrate, but they can't see my video feed, which might be a blessing. And then, of course, I can demonstrate how this website functions. And maybe it's a blog to do with your research project. So you could navigate and show a little bit of the resource you've been building as part of your research. As I say, this works quite well for websites, although do be aware that the screen share can actually crop slightly the sides of the screen. So it's best to have your application or your browser or whatever you're going to share set to about sort of 90% of screen width, we've found. When you've had enough of screen sharing, you move your mouse over the podium and you click on the button that says Stop Sharing My Screen. Again, a little pause to make sure that your video is, audio, sorry, is coming through clearly. Okay, so we've covered loading files, we've covered sharing screen. I'll just cover very briefly how we sidebar somebody. So I'm going to leave these two guys up on the stage and remove myself off to the side. And then I'm going to, because Ralph earlier raised his hand and had a question, I'm going to have a little sidebar conversation to show you how, maybe Ralph, you could just raise your hand for me. That would demonstrate this nicely. So I see a raised hand. I move my mouse down there and I can see it's over Ralph's thumbnail. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to be a convener who's sitting on the side. I see Ralph has raised his hand. We're not quite sure why. And I'm going to sidebar Ralph first to find out if it was his intention to come on stage, and secondarily to check if his camera and microphone are working. It may be, for example, his camera might be off. So let me have a go. I'm going to take myself off and leave these two guys to chat. And so you can see I've stopped my broadcast, and now I go down to raised hands, where I see Ralph has been waiting about 40 seconds very patiently. And now this button that says sidebar is enabled for me, and I'm going to sidebar him. And what happens is a window appears over here where I'm now having a conversation with Ralph. Hello, Ralph, can you hear me?
I can hear you, Rowan, yes.
Excellent. So I can hear Ralph, he can hear me, but I've noticed, for example, that his thumbnail there looks a little bit frosty. Ralph, did you by chance turn off your camera so you could eat something?
I might have done. I was having a cup of tea, so I might have done that in the settings. I'll just go and check.
So if you go to the cog in the top right corner, that's the one.
Top right-hand corner, yes. Okay, I've clicked that, and then it's saying camera, and there's two options: camera off, audio only, and easy camera.
I select easy camera, I reckon.
Hello, Rowan.
Excellent. So there you see where you might have a delegate who wants to come on stage. Had he said he didn't want to come on stage, I could simply say, okay, thank you very much, and end that conversation. But as he does want to come on stage, I want to get his audio and camera working fine, so I can quickly troubleshoot that and then say, okay, Ralph, do you want to go up on stage now?
I had a quick supplementary question for Trina.
Excellent. So I shall spotlight you, and that will put you up onto the stage. Here we go, on a new podium. And when I do that, it ends my sidebar conversation.
Hello, Ralph.
A quick supplementary question. You mentioned Mary being the second child of Henry VIII and his heir, and you called her first child, and you called her Bloody Mary. Is that who I would know as Mary, Queen of Scots? Or
No,
is
no,
someone completely different?
That's an entirely different Mary.
Oh, well, there we are. Cleared that up. Thank you very much, Trina.
And because I put him onto the stage, I also need to take him off the stage. So I'm going to go stop broadcast. Okay, excellent.
Is that part of the British citizenship test?
Yes, of course.
Ralph just failed and the Estonian has passed.
Excellent.
Yes, probably twice over.
These questions are very difficult, actually.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you if Catherine Howard is a relative.
Definitely. We've been persecuted for years.
Right, guys. Okay, so the last side of this demonstration now, which has dragged on slightly longer than intended, thanks to our useful injection of historical knowledge and British citizenship knowledge, is how you leave your session. So let's assume we've come to the end. Everybody's presented. Everybody's asked their questions. You have a few options. I mean, if you want to leave this panel at any time, you simply close this tab in your browser. And we would suggest you then head back to the conference timetable page where you can then pick to go to alternative sessions. If your session has come to an end and you wish to carry on discussing, you could linger on in this room, enable a couple of open podiums. Maybe you could have a 6-way video chat down at the bottom. There are various ways in which participants may want to continue in the room. Or you could say, well, I'm now going to, this session is now over and I suggest we all now head over to the coffee room, and there will be a link in the bottom left of the attendee's screen, which has a button to go to coffee. It can also be reached via the conference timetable page, but you can suggest to people that now they may want to carry on their networking and their conversations over in the coffee room. Ideally, we don't want sessions to linger on and on and on. People do need time to have a break. They do need time to go and network with people who weren't in the panel. So that's what we'd suggest. So thank people for coming. Let them know if there's any follow-up to the panel, but otherwise suggest people head over to coffee where they can continue to network and enjoy the conference. Okay, we're going to post this video online for you, obviously. There are also other materials, web pages that help to explain how you use the admin interface. Please study the video, study the other page, and please try and look at all of this before you enter into your panel-specific trainings that we're going to be holding in the coming weeks, so that you are well placed to make use of those trainings as efficiently as possible, because we only have a limited amount of time to cover everybody. So please, use this video, use the web pages, and we will see you in future trainings. And I will just demonstrate that as I leave this panel, I'm going to show how I would then go back to the conference timetable page. So thank you all for attending. It was good to see you all, and let's meet in the coffee room. Thank you. So I close this tab like this, and then I load up in my browser the timetable of the conference. Here's a sample. And here I am back at the conference timetable, and there will be a link here to the coffee room. Or if I want to go to another session, if I've overrun, I can now click on panel session 2, and then we can see the panel explorer again for that session. I will be able to click on a particular panel, and in this panel explorer, if it's taking place virtually, there will be a button here rather than this location here. There'll be a button that allows me to go and head on to the next Shindig. Simple as that. So we've covered all of the topics that you can see on the left. We also looked at a few extras at the end of the session. One extra that we should perhaps have covered is how you might have a sidebar conversation with your own co-convener, another admin. in the room. In order to do that, you also need to be off stage. So I'm going to take myself off stage. So stage is left up. It can have people talking. It could have slides in view. And then I might want to have a separate little conversation with my co-convener, which can't be witnessed by everyone in the room. So I move my mouse over the admins. As I move my mouse over James's image there, I see the ability to text chat him, which would call up a text window, and I could send him a message, or better still, sidebar. When I click sidebar, we then enter into a video chat. Hi, James.
Hi there. Can you hear me?
So, yep, I can hear you nicely. Are
Okay.
you all ready with the panel? We can go ahead and carry on in the order we've agreed.
Yep, all's good.
No last minute changes.
No, nothing I've heard of.
Excellent. Okay, so in that way, you can have a quick side conversation backstage with your colleague to make sure that everything is going smoothly. So this might be in the middle of someone else's presentation. However, if they are presenting and you are controlling their slides, you need to bear in mind that you'll need to keep an ear out for possibly moving the slides along as well. So don't get too engrossed in your side conversation. If you're playing a video of a pre-recorded presentation, it will be somewhat easier because you will have about 15 minutes in which you can perhaps give slightly less attention to the presentation and make sure that everything is okay with your colleague. So that demonstrates that functionality quite nicely. When you've finished, you can make it larger. This makes it full screen. Well, not full screen, but bigger for you. So we can see each other. And then to exit, there's that button there that is exit. All right, James, I'm going to end the conversation.
Okay.
Bye.
Cheers. Bye.
Having clicked that, the conversation goes off. And that completes a demonstration of sidebarring of another admin. Thank you very much. Okay, thank you for listening. If you cannot find answers to your questions either in the video or the website, please do send us an email. Okay, thank you very much.